In the late Cretaceous period, about 95 million years ago, the world was a greenhouse. The polar caps were non-existent, and a vast, shallow sea split North America in two. On the muddy coastlines of this ancient world, a creature no longer than a household dog scurried through the undergrowth. This was Aegialosaurus. To a casual observer, it looked like a standard monitor lizard, slender, four-legged, and flickering its tongue to scent the air. It was a humble beginning for a creature destined to become the most feared predator in the history of the world's oceans. The story of the Mosasaurus is not one of sudden appearance, but of desperate, brilliant adaptation. These terrestrial lizards were being pushed to the margins by the rising dominance of land-dwelling dinosaurs. To survive, they did something radical. They returned to the water. At first, this transition was clumsy. Imagine a creature that still needed to return to the shore to lay eggs, much like a modern sea turtle. Over millions of years, natural selection began to overhaul their blueprints. Their feet, once tipped with claws for digging and running, began to web. Their skin thickened, and their bodies elongated into sleek, hydrodynamic torpedoes. By the time we reached the mid-Cretaceous, these semi-aquatic lizards had fully severed their ties to the land. They evolved to give live birth at sea, freeing them forever from the dangers of the shoreline. The real breakthrough came with their tails. Early ancestors used a serpent-like, side-to-side wiggle to move, which was energy-intensive and slow. But as the Mosasaurus lineage progressed, their tails transformed into powerful, vertical flukes, much like those of a shark. This wasn't just a physical change, it was a regime change. They were no longer just swimming lizards, they were becoming high-speed pursuit predators. By 70 million years ago, the transformation was complete. The creature that started as a small lizard hiding in the ferns had grown into a 60-foot-long Leviathan. But how do we know this story is true? The evidence lies in the limestone quarries of the Netherlands. In 1764, near the Meuse River, workmen discovered a massive, terrifying skull embedded in the rock. At the time, the concept of extinction didn't even exist in the scientific mind. Some thought it was a giant fish, others thought it was a crocodile or even a whale. It wasn't until the legendary naturalist Georges Cuvier examined the fossils that the truth emerged. He realized that this was a lizard, a monitor lizard, but on a scale that defied logic. He used these very bones to propose the then radical theory that entire species could vanish from the Earth. The Meuse lizard, or Mosasaurus, became the first creature in history to prove that the past was inhabited by monsters we could scarcely imagine. As we look at the transition from Aegialosaurus to Mosasaurus, we see a masterclass in evolution. They entered the water as underdogs, fleeing the terrestrial titans like T-Rex, only to find a vacuum in the ocean left by the declining ichthyosaurs and pliosaurs. They didn't just fill the gap, they expanded it, growing to sizes that made the largest land predators look like mere snacks. This was the dawn of the mosasaur, a land-born refugee that turned the global ocean into its personal hunting ground. Imagine a creature designed by nature for the sole purpose of underwater execution. When we look at the skeleton of a Mosasaurus hoffmanni, we aren't just looking at bones, we are looking at a masterclass in biological engineering. At its peak, this animal reached lengths of 50 to 60 feet, longer than a modern school bus, and weighed as much as 28 tons. But its size was only the beginning of its lethality.
The most terrifying feature of the Mosasaurus was its head. Its skull was nearly 6 feet long, constructed like a heavy-duty cage of bone. Unlike the rigid skulls of many land predators, the mosasaur possessed a kinetic skull. This means it had several joints that allowed the skull to flex and expand. Most notably, it had a double-hinged jaw. This wasn't just for a wider gape. It allowed the animal to walk its jaws over large prey, ratcheting a carcass down its throat even if the prey was too large to swallow in one gulp. But the real secret weapon was hidden deeper inside. If you were to look into the mouth of a living Mosasaurus, you would see a sight that seems pulled from a nightmare. In addition to the massive conical teeth lining its outer gums, it possessed a second set of teeth on the roof of its mouth, known as the pterygoid teeth. These curved, backward-pointing spikes acted like a conveyor belt of death. Once a Mosasaurus clamped down, these inner teeth ensured that even the slipperiest prey, be it a shark or a smaller mosasaur, could never escape. Every struggle by the victim only pushed it further toward the gullet. Moving down the body, we see how this lizard traded its legs for power. Its limbs had transitioned into 4 stiff paddle-like flippers. These weren't used for high-speed propulsion, but for steering and stability, much like the wings of a plane. The true engine was the tail. For decades, artists depicted mosasaurs with thin, eel-like tails, but recent fossil discoveries of soft tissue impressions have corrected this. We now know they had a powerful bilobed tail fluke, similar to that of a great white shark. This allowed for sit-and-wait ambush tactics. A mosasaurus could hover in the murky depths, nearly invisible, and then, with a few rhythmic thrashes of that massive fluke, accelerate to speeds that no prey could outrun. Its skin, too, was a marvel of evolution. Fossils have revealed that they were covered in small diamond-shaped scales, much like those of a snake, but significantly tougher. This skin was likely dark on top and light on the bottom, a classic camouflage known as countershading. From above, it blended into the dark depths. From below, it vanished against the sunlit surface. Finally, consider its lungs. Despite living its entire life in the water, the Mosasaurus was a breath taker. It had to surface for air, which meant its respiratory system was incredibly efficient. Its rib cage was massive, protecting lungs that could hold enough oxygen for long, deep dives into the cold, high-pressure zones of the western interior seaway. It was a lizard that had conquered the physics of the ocean, turning every biological disadvantage of its ancestors into a specialized tool for maritime dominance. This wasn't just a big lizard in a swimming pool. This was the ultimate apex predator, a biological tank that combined the bite of a T-Rex, the agility of a shark, and the lung capacity of a whale.
If the anatomy of the Mosasaurus was the engine of a war machine, its hunting tactics were the sophisticated software that ran it. To understand how this creature ruled the Cretaceous oceans, we have to look at the fossilized crime scenes left behind, stomach contents and bite marks on the bones of its contemporaries. The Mosasaurus was not a picky eater. It was a generalist predator that treated the entire ocean as a buffet. The primary strategy of the Mosasaurus was the ambush. Despite its massive size, it was a master of stealth. By using its counter-shaded skin, dark on the back to blend with the deep water, and light on the belly to mimic the sunlit surface, it could hang suspended in the water column, nearly invisible to anything swimming above or below it.
When a target was identified, the Mosasaurus didn't engage in a long, tiring chase. Instead, it used its powerful tail fluke to provide a sudden, explosive burst of speed, hitting its prey like a freight train before the victim even realized a predator was nearby. Once the strike landed, the mechanical horror of its mouth took over. For smaller prey, like the 10-foot-long predatory fish Xiphactinus or flightless diving birds like Hesperornis, the Mosasaurus simply snapped its jaws shut. But for larger, more dangerous prey, it used a bite-and-shake method. The conical teeth were designed to puncture and crush, not necessarily to slice. By gripping a limb or a neck and thrashing its massive head, the Mosasaurus could disarticulate its prey through sheer torque. Perhaps the most fascinating evidence of its diet comes from the shells of ammonites, the coiled cephalopod-like creatures of the era. Paleontologists have found numerous ammonite shells riddled with circular puncture wounds. For years, these were thought to be accidental, but closer inspection revealed they perfectly match the spacing of mosasaur teeth. The Mosasaurus would bite down on the shell to crush the air chambers, stripping the animal of its buoyancy before dragging the soft-bodied creature out to feed. However, the Mosasaurus didn't stop at invertebrates or fish. It was a macropredator that regularly engaged in intragilled predation, meaning it ate other apex predators. We have found the remains of long-necked plesiosaurs and even smaller species of mosasaurs inside the gut cavities of larger specimens. They were the ultimate enforcers of the big fish eat small fish rule. In some cases, fossil evidence suggests they even took on the archelon, a giant sea turtle the size of a car, using their immense bite force to crack through shells that were evolutionarily designed to be indestructible. This chapter of its life shows us a creature that was remarkably efficient. It didn't just hunt, it dominated the ecology. It occupied a niche so high on the food chain that its only real threat was another, larger Mosasaurus. This cannibalistic streak, evidenced by healed bite marks on the knouts of many fossils, suggests that they were highly territorial. They fought for the best hunting grounds, turning the pristine blue waters of the Cretaceous into a theater of constant, high-stakes combat. The Mosasaurus wasn't just a hunter, it was a biological force that dictated how every other creature in the sea lived, moved, and died. It is the ultimate who-would-win scenario of the prehistoric world. On one side, the tyrant lizard king, the heavy hitter of the terrestrial Cretaceous. On the other, the mosasaur, the undisputed ruler of the seaways. While Hollywood has pitted them against each other in dramatic, splashing spectacles, the real rivalry lies in their biological statistics and their roles as the ultimate carnivores of their respective domains. When we look at raw scale, the Mosasaurus holds a definitive edge in length. A large Tyrannosaurus rex reached about 40 to 42 feet from snout to tail. In contrast, the largest Mosasaurus Hoffmann specimens push toward 56 feet or more. In a head-to-tail lineup, the mosasaur would dwarf the rex. However, weight is a closer contest. Because the T-Rex was built with heavy, bird-like bone density for land movement, and the mosasaur was streamlined for water, both tipped the scales at roughly 8 to 15 tons, though the largest mosasaurs likely exceeded the Rex in total mass. The true divergence is found in their weaponry. The T-Rex possessed the strongest bite force of any terrestrial animal, estimated at about 12,000 pounds per square inch, enough to shatter the bones of a triceratops. The mosasaur's bite was slightly less powerful in terms of raw crushing force, but it was far more specialized for grip and retention. While the rex used its puncture-pull method to rip chunks of meat away, the mosasaur used its double-hinged jaw and pterygoid teeth to swallow prey whole or thrash it into submission. Sensory perception also tells a story of two different kings. The T-Rex had perhaps the best sense of smell in history and forward-facing eyes that provided excellent binocular vision and depth perception. The Mosasaurus, meanwhile, lived in a world where vision was often obscured by murky water. It relied heavily on its tongue, which, like a modern monitor lizard, was forked to taste the water for chemical signatures, and a highly developed sense of vibration. It could feel the heartbeat or the struggle of a fish from hundreds of yards away. The rivalry is also a matter of geography. These two titans lived at the same time, often only a few miles apart, separated only by the shoreline of the western interior seaway. While a T-Rex might have scavenged a washed-up mosasaur carcass, or a mosasaur might have snatched a young rex that ventured too deep into the surf, they occupied two different versions of the same planet. Ultimately, the Mosasaurus represents the pinnacle of what a carnivore can become when freed from the constraints of gravity. In land, a predator's size is limited by the strength of its legs and the energy required to move. In the buoyancy of the ocean, the Mosasaurus was able to transcend those limits, growing into a Leviathan that makes even the king of the dinosaurs look like a middleweight contender. In the grand hierarchy of the Cretaceous, the T-Rex may have ruled the land, but the Mosasaurus ruled the world.
The reign of the mosasaurs didn't end because it was outcompeted or outhunted. It ended because the world itself broke. Around 66 million years ago, a 6-mile-wide asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, triggering the KPG extinction event. While we often focus on the firestorms and the nuclear winter that killed the dinosaurs on land, the impact was equally, if not more, catastrophic for the oceans. The impact caused massive ocean acidification and a collapse of the marine food web from the bottom up. The tiny plankton at the base of the chain died off, followed by the fish, and finally the giant reptiles that relied on them. The Mosasaurus, for all its power, was a victim of its own success. As a specialized apex predator at the very top of the pyramid, it required a massive amount of calories to survive. When the buffet of the Cretaceous seas vanished, the king of the deep had nowhere to turn. For 66 million years, their bones lay silent in the chalk and limestone of the earth. Then, in the late 18th century, humanity began to dig. The discovery of the first Mosasaurus skull in a mine in Maastricht, Netherlands, was more than just a paleontological find. It was a philosophical earthquake. At the time, the world believed in a great chain of being where no link could ever be broken. The idea that a creature as magnificent and powerful as the Mosasaurus could simply cease to exist challenged every religious and scientific dogma of the era. This fossil was so valuable that during the French Revolutionary Wars, French troops reportedly protected the house where the skull was kept to ensure it wasn't destroyed during the bombardment of Maastricht. It was eventually taken to Paris as a trophy of war. There, the naturalist Georges Cuvier used it to establish the very concept of extinction. The Mosasaurus taught us that the Earth has a history far deeper and more violent than our own.
Today, the legacy of the Mosasaurus lives on through its closest living relatives, monitor lizards and snakes. When you see a Komodo dragon flick its tongue or a python unhinge its jaw to swallow prey, you are seeing a scaled-down version of the mechanics that once ruled the oceans. The Mosasaurus remains a symbol of nature's ability to take a small terrestrial underdog and, through the sheer pressure of survival, forge it into the most formidable carnivore the world has ever seen. It wasn't just a sea dinosaur, it was the ultimate expression of reptilian evolution. It reminds us that while the land has its kings, the ocean has always belonged to the monsters.